Hello, and welcome to the Armen Show podcast. Science, people, creativity, learning more, expanding our framework. We are always reaching out for more in terms of knowledge, people, and growth. There's a lot happening in the world right now. We are in 2024. My guest today, he is at Chicago Booth. He is in economics. He is the Howard and Nancy Marks Fellow at Chicago Booth Business School. We have Dr. Brian Jabarian. Brian, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Armen, for having me.
I'm glad to have you on. I would like to mention to the people that your research investigates the human and societal impacts of emerging technologies in real-world contexts. You develop behavioral, experimental, evidence-based approach to explore these impacts using strategy and innovation, cognitive decision-making, and behavioral welfare. And it's interdisciplinary, which is something I always value. When you connect multiple fields together, there can be a lot of impact there. How did you get to where you currently are at Chicago? What was the path to your current research?
I got my PhD in economics at Paris School of Economics last year in 2023, and then I went on the postdoc market and I applied a bit everywhere in the US. A bit everywhere in the world, and I got admitted to Chicago to this fellowship, which is a 3-year one. So I will go next year on the academic job market. Um,
What has interested you in economics in the first place?
so I've been always interested in economics in high school, basically, and in philosophy as well. So I did both basically after the high school in parallel because I was seeing a lot of complementary between these two fields. Economics for testing and having a reality check with type of imagination and theory that we were cooking up basically in philosophy. So I think the confrontation with reality is really what I like in economics, basically.
That is cool. Now, I had seen that you had done research. I first found your material from research that you had done with past guest John List, who was also in economics and there. How has been your connection with him and your research that you have teamed up with him on?
Yeah, so when I went on the market, I met with Gary Charnes, who passed away a few months ago, basically. I met him at Santa Barbara, and we connected around this other work I had on ambiguity. And we had a lot of fun because it was a puzzle and people couldn't find the right solution. So we just had a lot of fun discussing about that. And then I told him I was very interested in AI and working with AI in my other chapter, the one that you know on critical thinking. And then he said that he was very interested in AI. So we just started talking about AI and methods because he had this long history on methods. And during the work, basically, he mentioned that John List would be potentially interested in this work. And I was going to go to Chicago at some point. Basically, I knew that I was admitted to Chicago, so it was great to reach out to him and propose to join. And since then, basically, we have been started a few other field experiment work in progress alongside the idea of how to use AI in science, but also how to use AI and governmental setting, basically. So that's how it worked.
Are there any specializations that come to mind at Chicago Booth in comparison to other locations maybe around the country? Is there anything that is somewhat different in the economics category?
Yeah, I mean, Chicago has been famous for behavioral economics, basically, which is my specialization with Richard Thaler, but also a lot of like fantastic other researchers, Alex Simas, for instance, Leo Burstein, and other people. So it has this reputation on being really strong on behavioral economics. But also, what attracted me compared to other schools was like this heritage of Gary Becker and this openness toward other sciences and other disciplines like the humanities. So they had this. I shared this philosophy of science with Gary Becker in some sense on how to combine different disciplines and yet being confused by when you combine them in different ways, or how to govern multiple interests, basically. Sometimes when you start doing interdisciplinary, it's hard to maintain a clear epistemological status of the proposition you propose. We don't know whether it's a normative claim or whether it's a positive claim. So normative, you cannot test it and check it with reality. It's like, I believe you should do A or B, because I say so, because I have a philosophy argument or whatsoever. And a positive claim is something you say that this is happening, or you describe the state of the world, and you know that because you're developing a methodology to access the reality. And sometimes they are in clash in the mind of people. But like, it's never been the case for me, and never been the case for people at Chicago. So it was a very natural fit. Yeah.
That's wonderful. You mentioned economics and philosophy. How are they connected when you think about them?
Well, if you take like few centuries ago, they were like mixed together. It was quite hard to understand what was the difference between the two. And then there was this kind of like epistemological cleaning, basically, with like trying to differentiate function for each discipline and their role in society. And basically, naturally, philosophy is always more general than any other discipline, but at the end of the day, it's truly more oriented around imagination or normativity or thought experiment. You try to imagine societies, you try to imagine what could be changed in the world. So for me, philosophy is really about imagination. And sometimes, I mean, most of the time, actually, imagination is at the core of the ideation process, or like trying to find new ways, basically, to test a claim or test a theory. And economics is really good at modeling basically a theory and making sure you can test it, like following Popper um, um, philosophy of science, for instance, where you have to test it and falsify basically your claim. This is something which is not for philosophy, right? But philosophy is a bit before, and it can help coming with like imagination. And this is how basically I also found this thought experiment on ambiguity. It was just a game and for fun, for the mind. And then it became a test because I could use experimental economics as a way to test it, right? A bit with also critical thinking, where it seems to be an abstract term, unclear, but it's present everywhere in philosophy. But then how exactly are you going to test it? How are you exactly going to develop policies based on this concept? Well, you need to operationalize it. And this philosophy of science called operationalization truly has been for me a bridge between philosophy and economics. I mean, Samuelson actually was also in Chicago at some point, and he was also very inspired by this philosophy of science, actually, on how to operationalize a concept and then being able to test it. So, yeah.
That's an important quality there, making a term something you can look at in detail, not just a phrase that is used, but what does that actually mean? Can we check on that? Because when terms get used but don't have details associated with them, the terms lose their value over time. They need to be checked in some way. That's valid.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. What is critical thinking? That's true.
Yeah.
Now, before we get to critical thinking and its connection with artificial intelligence and storytelling, can you tell us a bit about your general, when you cover with individuals, you have an agenda that you present, things you cover. Can you showcase something to us that we can take a look at?
Yeah, sure. I have a few slides actually I can show. Basically, the agenda I am after is really trying to understand what are the real impact basically and of emergent technologies around these three main perspective on efficiency, on basically economic impact, but also welfare, which is something that I don't hear often basically covered. But like, is AI really helping, for instance, to reduce inequality, and how people can maximize their welfare using AI beyond just making money or yeah. So that's important. And also another thing that which is not yet that covered also that I am very interested is the cognition aspect of the AI deployment, because at the end of the day, this is just another technology basically. I mean, just another. It's a very new one, but it's always exists interaction with humans. So always in the interaction with the cognition. So the way you see the world mediated through technology. So the mind is very important. So yeah, things that we covered. And I mean, you can call this approach like cognitive economics of technology, basically. And truly, like, how can you maximize and optimize the efficiency and welfare of different economic behaviors, but also improve the cognitive processes of underlying such behaviors. So to give you an example, so with one of my colleagues in St. Gallen, Paolo Piacquadio, we just secured a grant basically on trying to understand how people themselves basically understand and why they support a given economic policy. You know, sometimes you hear people being for an egalitarian taxation policy, and sometimes it's unclear whether they do that because they are ideologically aligned and they absolutely understand the perfection, the behavioral consequences for the household of that income taxation policy, or whether they actually are for this income taxation policy and without understanding the consequences. So here technology can come in, right, and trying to simplify, and AI here can help those population potentially to truly understand the behavioral consequences of a given income taxation. Like, hey, you know, if you support this income bracket, this is the amount of taxation you will pay in your household. This is how it will impact your consumption and expenditure, basically, basket. That's where you can not only improve the efficiency here in terms of like, as a principal or as a policymaker, you are more certain for why people support your policy or not. So it improves the efficiency of the aggregation mechanism here, but also it improves the welfare, right? You don't want to misguide people in a taxation policy that will hurt them or make them believe that it will be good for them when it won't be. And here you can also improve welfare. That's one example. Another example is most of the people, they make decisions under uncertainty, ambiguity, and all these concepts, but basically complexity. Any decision you take in your life most of the time is quite complex. Which insurance package you should take, which, for one you should decide, or this type of package are really complex to understand as well. And sometimes when you face uncertainty, the way you're going to represent the state of the world, as in the way you're going to modelize or model whether what you face is that object or that object, it's going to have an impact in your entire process of dealing with this addition problem. So if you misrepresent the state of the world, you will just be actually put into a process of not solving basically the problem. So to give you an example, in this ambiguity paper that I mentioned, it's really important to know whether we're talking about, what are we talking about, right? So if you look at this paper basically, to give you the spiel in 1 minute, you have to earn, in one earn you have 50 red balls, 50 black balls, so 100 in total. The other one, you earn 100 balls, red or black, but you don't know the composition. And then the game goes as follows. You have to do twice from the same urn, either twice from the risky urn or twice from the ambiguous urn with replacement, and you win if the two balls you draw match in color. So now when I ask you which one of those urns you want to draw from, here you can think about what is a state space in terms of outcomes. So you might think, oh, I should represent the state space as twice red or twice black, or one red and one black, or one black and one red. And if you look at the state space, basically, both drawings, twice from the risky and twice from the ambiguous one, they give you the same outcome, basically, space. So you would say, maybe I'm indifferent. But if you were representing the state space as saying, look, here you have potentially between 0 and 100 red balls in the ambiguous urn, now you realize that actually, no matter what, drawing twice from the ambiguous urn will always give you a better chance of winning. So it would be better for you to draw twice from the ambiguous urn. So here is an example on how you're going to represent the states of the world is going to impact basically your resolution. So here, maybe AI and all different type of technology can help you making sure that you represent correctly the state of the world so that you take the right decision. So that's what we mean by cognitive processes here. Yeah, so that's like for the more cognitive aspect of that. But then the other important aspect of my agenda is once we understand a bit how people interact more on the macro level or lab level with technology, we absolutely want to make sure to understand what are the real world impact of those technology. Maybe it's important for a few people or like at the margin, but like how does it impact the masses and the entire population? So for that, basically, I haven't seen any other better way than trying to partner with firms, governments to basically launch different types of A/B tests, basically, where you're going to differentiate the two branches or multiple ones that you have in your experiment in terms of how you design the technology, and then ask people, and then randomly assign people to one of these three branches or two branches and see how the way you have been designing the technology here, the AI, impact their behavior in real life, basically. So that helps to make the bridge between the cognition, but also the cognition in the lab, but also cognition in the real world setting. So yeah, that's like a few projects that I am currently in the design phase. But yeah, I'm more than happy to discuss in more detail on a few of those. Yeah.
I like that you're looking to bridge the gap between the real world and what is thought, because once you can match those up, then you have great results. But if there is something missing or left out, then you are going to have poor decision making, and there's no way you're going to make the most efficient decisions in your life.
Yeah, I
So,
agree. I mean, it's like imagine going to, with a lab-based paper to a policymaker or a CEO and say, here's like my result from a lab and please take this decision, right? I mean, making a recommendation based on a lab is a bit any scientific paper is some kind of MVP, but a lab is even more so an MVP than a field experiment, because with a field experiment, you am more comfortable, making a recommendation to a CEO or like a government official based on real point estimate, right? Depending on the size you have, depending on your context, depending blah, blah, on setting, but comparing a lab and a field, but like it doesn't mean that lab are not useful. I mean, lab are like extremely useful because you can have more space and more like control on the environment, and by doing so, you can go more deep in identifying which cognitive processes might be the most relevant for this particular question. So now, when you go in the field, you kind of like are more aware. Oh, I should more try to focus capturing something along the line that I found in the lab, basically, right? So that's very complementary in my mind.
is it fair to say there's a lot of focus toward the counterintuitive because the intuitive is already happening? Whereas there's this one example where if there's three doors and you want to pick which one is the one, if they remove one of the doors, you have a better chance of picking the right one if you switch to the other unknown one. It doesn't really make sense intuitively, but numerically it does work out better. Do you tend to be more focused on the counterintuitive because the intuitive is already taking care of itself?
That's interesting. Um, uh, so I think I will start. I always start with just the intuitive approach, right? So I have some intuition most of the time, actually, that I cannot explain. I mean, like everyone else, right? So you start having intuition, but then you start becoming aware of your intuition, right? And now you start questioning it and asking why I got this intuition. And this is where you take the road to the counterintuitive approach to your own intuition. So this game I mentioned to you about the paradox and the ambiguity, it's a paradox because everyone is stuck in the intuitive approach, right? So they don't become aware on, wait, maybe I might be wrong here, or maybe my intuition is misleading. So that's where the researcher usually, or people who are thinking a bit more or have more time to think, we expect them to take more the counterintuitive approach. So I like your take on, I, I like the idea of science as trying to find those counterintuitive when it makes sense to find them, right? Sometimes you see people looking for stuff like, sure, it's counterintuitive, but like, who cares, right? I mean, I don't know. But like, so counterintuitive when it is a key potential mechanism, right? So trying to identify which counterintuitive, like in your example, why people are not taking this counterintuitive approach is not an easy question. There are many things that can go in the mind of people here, right? So this is where science can help, and also philosophy, right? Like philosophy can help you imagining a lot of like weird stuff, right, which are very important to me. And then within this set of weird stuff, trying to find which one could be tested in conditional on operationalizing those ways, but still, that's why thinking always out of the box or counterintuitive to me seems very important.
Do you have periods when you're doing research where you have like expansion and you try to throw in every possible idea and then you consolidate that to just a few? Do you do a lot of expansion and very little consolidation, or how would you describe those two parts for trying to figure out the
Uh,
steps to solving a problem or solution?
oh, I would say I'm just I go with my obsessions, I would say, and I try to see whether it's only Brian's obsession and not that interesting, or whether it's something that other people might share, right? So it's not like whenever I get an idea, I go into expansion and try to scale it. But within the last 10 years or so, I haven't moved that much my agenda, just like around the same topic, but I've been more in expansion, but it's more gradual. It's like back and forth trials and see, right? It's also in timing. So some moment, there are some times where people would start getting interested in your research that you've done a few years ago, right? And you're like, why no one was caring 4 years ago or 5 years ago? Only a few people, but now everyone is it, right? So that's why, like, sometimes you leave us on the side, right? Some ideas because you thought no one cared that much as well, or you thought it was only your obsession. So you say, like, I mean, I cannot impose my obsession on everyone else, but like sometimes where like people just need more time to come up with the same conclusion, or they just take different pattern or path basically. And so it's good to always be uncertain whether you should pursue or not an idea, I think. um yeah, because we are doing I'm doing what I'm doing to be the most helpful also to people, but I am also doing what I'm doing because this is what I like the most, right? And this is my first reason I do that, and not on the job because I have stuff in my mind that I need to clean with research basically. And but we should make sure it's also helpful for people in some way, and helpful, not impactful, right? I mean, it's hard to assess. What do we mean by that?
You bring up some very good points here. Three different important points there. The first one that comes to mind, that one is very interesting to me, where when you're accurate at the current moment, but maybe you're 4 years ahead of the general consensus. It's an odd place to be because 4 years later, what you were thinking or leaning towards was correct, but because it wasn't joined in by a variety of individuals or accepted by others that affect things, then even though it was accurate, it was too early. There's something funny about this too early or on time or after the fact in relation to people, that it doesn't take away from the accuracy of it, but you won't be able to get the ball rolling on something the same way as when the moment fits what you're thinking. Do you think about that
Yeah,
sometimes?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. So when I got interested in AI was through my philosophy work with people in Oxford. From the University of Oxford, they were all philosophers, and they had different groups there where they were all interested in all kind of weird stuff. And at that moment in 2020, they were already all interested in GPT-3 and like GPT-2 even before. So, I was like, wow, that sounds super interesting because now you can push what you can study in the brain without having to have neuroscience approach, but just open-ended questions and like incentivizing in a new way. So I was excited for that reasons. And then I realized that actually the potential when GPT-3 API arrived, I was very excited about the potential for making scientific knowledge more accessible to people and how that would impact basically news media in the sense I was thinking that like media would grab more easily scientific knowledge if we make them easy, or like policymaker or CEO on how to invest in sometimes they have like very complicated patents, and people use that as the way to lure more money from the VC, but like the VC just got excited without understanding the technology and super complicated. They don't have the time. Or when you talk to the World Bank director, you meet him in the elevator for 2 minutes. So you have 2 minutes to pitch the agenda. So for all these use cases, I thought about AI, and GPT-3 was super interesting, basically. But then I realized, like I said, wait, but if this is an API, then any firm can use it. So then I started contacting firm to try to launch this type of field experiment, pitching them the potential of GPT-3 and saying, look, we should try to do real world testing of what would happen in this context. And no firm got back to me. No one, none. They were like, we don't see the potential. It's just another API call for us. But then when the interface of ChatGPT arrived, basically that changed the game, because it's a bit like, the computer was here, but then the design of the MacBook made such a way that like everyone got into. So it's not like an innovation. I mean, truly there was a difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4 in terms of capacity, but I wonder if like OpenAI had made accessible way before GPT-2 even, or GPT-3 as an interface, maybe we would have this AI hype way before. That's what I'm saying. I cannot check that, but like that moment was the moment where I was starting to wrap up my PhDs, and I didn't have the time to go back to the firm at that moment. I was focusing also on getting a job. But then when I arrived at Chicago, my first thing to do was like to reconnect with firms and say, hey guys, let's try to do something, because, and now everyone got so much excited about it. But that's a moment where, like too early in interest, but also the technology was kind of already here, but not the design. So making accessible to people was also very fundamental to get people interested in technology, right? Um, so yeah, it wasn't for us, because all the connection I had started to build in some sense. I had some experience. So when I went back to firms, I said like, I tried to do that for years now. Now I'm here, and I've been learning so much from my mentors here, obviously at Chicago. So it was very interesting also to understand how to better interact with firm, etc. in general. So yeah.
That's a key point there. Accessibility is not always. Whenever I've looked at it, I've thought to myself that this is accessible, or maybe computing in 1995, I thought it was accessible to everybody, but actually there would be a large percentage of people that would say, "Oh, I have to edit INI files for Windows to make things work properly." That's not accessible. For them, that was like a cutoff. And then when it becomes simpler, or can be used in a less cognitive load way, suddenly that's accessible. So it's not always like that they cannot actually see it. They can see it maybe, but it's I don't put that much effort into something until the effort comes down to here. It's not accessible to me, I think,
Yeah.
is the
I,
criteria.
I agree. And also it's important to stress who we're talking about, right? Like the people in my case are like the non-engineering executive people. So the moment those guys like CEO, CTO, and all other executive could have a first-hand experience with the project without having to go through their own engineering people, that changed again, because they saw the potential directly, right? They could ask the question directly they believe was the most valuable to them to ask, like, to interact with the technology. Say like, oh wow. It's a bit like, as you're saying, it's also cognitive load for different people who may be all were very smart. It's just like they're not used and not familiar with the interface. Like, trying to show that an API call with GPT-3 to a CEO can leverage that type of like, impact, you're going to need like an hour, or like, going to, and they don't have or like 30 minutes or like 20 minutes even. Here in 30 seconds, you say, just go there, put whatever you want. You're going to have your mind blind away in 2 seconds, at scale, without having any software prepared. That's what changed, right? It's a bit with the iPhone or like the phone, right? So here the phone, download the apps you want, you will see the potential of the iPhone. It's not like me showing you that in the App Store you have that one by one, right? So that's what changed to me in my mind.
That's an important point. The other point you brought up, how to assess something is helpful or impactful. What do you look at there? How can you tell that something was helpful or impactful to the end user or the firm or anybody?
You mean after technology has been deployed in a society, or when the technology arrive, or how can we like?
After, well, the first one is what I was thinking of, and also I was thinking of when you, maybe that'll come back to when you're speaking about with firms, but how to assess whether you have been helpful or impactful with a study or a like path for others to use for
Oh,
their company or whatnot. Maybe we should save that for the firm part. I may save
yeah.
that for that
I
portion.
mean, we can do that now. I mean,
Sure.
as yeah. I mean, so in general, it's hard to. I don't have a solution to measure like impact in general or helpful in general. As a researcher, it's kind of hard to know. I think like there are like many different type of metrics, so you could see the citation potentially like as a proxy, or people using like citations as in not just a citation, but like citation as in people building on your framework, and then they cite you in the way that like it's truly building upon what you've been doing. So this you need like 10, 20 years, I don't know, to wait and see. Another more direct way I believe is like I love working with students and having mentees and having more junior collaborators. I don't teach for now at Booth. I taught a lot at PSE, Paris School of Economics, but here no. I mean, not at least, yeah. But basically, here when you have mentees, it's a very interesting way. It's like, when you had like Leonardo da Vinci or like those people from the Renaissance having those workshops type of model. This I love a lot. I think I learn a lot like this also myself with mentors here, there, a bit everywhere. And I love doing that also with mentees. So I think that's for me like the most selfish way of knowing I have an impact, I guess. But that's not fair for the criterion. Then if you want to know whether technology has been helpful, so I mean, why I believe using field experiments or just experiments are a great tool. Like, by the way, just experiment is just like a test, like an A/B test. So what we mean by that is like you randomize users to one setting and randomize users to another setting, and you check some outcome variables, whether they are economic variables or psychological variables and or behavioral intermediate variables through a survey or whatever. And what do we mean by one setting and another setting? In our case of AI here is like deploying that version of AI or no version at all of AI for this other group, and trying to understand by this randomization, you can compare and isolate the effect of the context on the two basically group and try to understand what is the real impact of a technological deployment on a population. And that's for me, it's a crucial metric or like methodology to be able to answer your question, which is what is when technology is useful. Of course, you can also wait and see through history, and then you look back and try to beat having some estimate on observational data you have accumulated. But ex ante is really hard to know. Like when Google Books started to, uh, came up like 12 years ago, something like that. Like yeah, a bit more actually now, and they started like scrapping all the books. Like ex ante regulators were like, oh my god, this is going to kill like every bookstore. This is going like extra, which might have done in some way, but like exposed now we see that like Google Books in some sense is used by millions of people who don't have access to library or bookstore in the world. So has it been like useful or not for the at the aggregate in the world? In some sense, it's quite hard to say that it was not helpful at all for all this massive world population who don't have access like us to library, etc., but only the internet connection, right? Even if they don't have access to the full books. So this ex ante is never like before. It's never really a good proxy, I guess. Ex post is interesting, but like then you lose, what if it was not Google Books, but like more serious like more directly damageable technology, like a biotechnology or whatever. You just say, let's wait and see, and it might kill a few people, and then we see, right? So this is where you want to intervene and find the in between. So for some use case of the technology, you will have to be more ex ante strict on the regulation and avoid any type of field experiment as well. For some other, you don't really care because it's not that high priority, but like there is a massive range of like use case in between where you can use field experiment to try and see basically, and to basically develop a lot of data support to after telling the population whether this technology is risky or not.
It makes sense. For economics, you have to go a few steps ahead. You have to have the data. Things have to be run through before you can look at them in detail. And so I guess philosophy would be slightly before that, because should we do this in the first place? I've talked with a few ethics people about AI and its impacts, and there's only so much you can think about it before deploying it and then looking at what it's
Yeah,
caused, because it's estimating.
yeah. I mean, the more I mean, it's really an allocation of time, right? So the more you think about it, it doesn't mean the technology is waiting for you to finish your thought before moving forward. So, I mean, at some point, like I'm sure you can. That's why that's why economics for me is like very important and has a priority in my mind, at least for in my life. It's because um, the more you wait, in particular, like to develop all this data infrastructure, all this data, because like, hear me out, like the firm I work with, some of them are like the global leaders in their industry, right? And they don't have the type of data pipeline and data infrastructure that I need as an economist of AI to be able to observe the type of risk they tell me they're interested in measuring, right? So a lot of my work has nothing to do basically with AI. Like it's just changing like what like Susan Ati, which is like one of the first economists that I know who did this type of firm experiment and technology back then, was saying is and was telling me it's like really a problem of data culture, right? So it's really changing the organization culture around the technology more than just like the technology itself, basically. Like the technology itself is the least of our discussion when I talk to firm and CEO, basically, because like how are you going to make sure the randomization is truly in place all the time of the deployment? Which data do you need? How do you when I talk about data, I don't talk like about one source of data. I talk like multiple type of source of data, from the resume, from the employee, so the candidates as an employee, and I'm talking about like many different type of like data architecture. Some are using Workday, some Compass, some you need some SQ. I mean, it's numerous type of language also that you need, like in SQL, whatever. And you need to uniformize all of these and standardize all these such that I can have access to the data. And then you need to explain to a bunch of people who have PhDs but not have PhDs in experimental economics or behavioral economics why an experiment is useful. And because the AI has been in the hand most of the time of engineers, people who don't have this background in social sciences, for most of them, and don't have in particular this background in A/B tests and whatever, the way they think about measuring impact and it's like, this more lab trial. Oh, we launch it a bit, we see, and no, you don't see anything actually here. You need the counterfactual, you need the group, and then you need the counterfactual of this group, but you need the other group and you need the counterfactual, and then that's how you compare two sets of the world where you have of the same type of population, same, more or less same, similar, basically. And it's another, it's like educating very smart and talented people to change the way they see the notion of testing. And you need that first. And the more you wait in the case of AI, as in the more you think about the catastrophe, but the potential catastrophe, as like I have a few friends who decided to go fully in PhD in philosophy as a profession. And it's we're talking about like an exponential technology here. Like every day is like as if last year it was 100 years ago. So the more you wait to develop this, which by the way, we take the same amount of time today and tomorrow. So it will be even more costly to start deploying all this data infrastructure next year. when the curve you will be already there, right? So it will be really harsh for firms basically. Because some tells me, well, Brian, we just want to lose the hype here. I don't want to do an experiment with you now. Let's get back tomorrow. I said, as you want. Tomorrow the hype will be done, and you will need data to keep doing whatever you want, whether raising fund, whether it's like helping your population, whether it's like delivering a service for your users. You will need data to know how to do that, and it will be still costly to deploy this infrastructure. There is no that's what I like about economics. There is no other way than having deploying data infrastructure and test basically to get access to the data in like measuring impact in our sense. And that's what I like about economics, is like this check with reality I was mentioning at the beginning.
It's something that I've always thought of. The compounding can't start until you start. And so if you see the world in that way, then it's like, do you see how this will function? But if someone is more thinking in linear terms or less than compounding, it doesn't have the same urgency because there's not so much impact. A week from now is not that different from today in that aspect. So that creates a friction because one sees so much and potential costs and potential loss, and the other says little bit of risk, not too much loss, and I'd rather not make the decision or leave it for a bit.
Yeah, I mean,
Different viewpoint.
I agree with you, right? Like it depends on the type of use case of AI, right? So with one of my firm partner, what we're doing there is deploying AI for conducting interviews, like vocal interviews, only phone-based. Tomorrow it will be potentially with video. Sorry. And here they're like not testing what are the consequences of that deployment through an A/B test would be a bit, drastic for the company in some way directly, just from the person of the company. Let's suppose they deploy it at scale, or this trial, they don't seem to see any problem. But next month, maybe the applicant pool is going directly down, and then they're out of business basically. And they don't know exactly why. So here we help them, for instance, directly on the firm to understand what's happening with this AI deployment in terms of like the outcome variable. Is AI for some reason selecting only candidates that have a lower potential of productivity or lower potential of accepting a job offer or starting the job, because they're screening a lot of candidates. So when you arrive at this stage, at the interview stage, we're only keeping like 15, 20, 15, 18% of the entire pipeline of candidates. So imagine now all the AI is like not making offer or like doing something weird here. You lost 85% already because you were screening, but now we're in the 15. So next month, people are like, I'm not so sure I want to apply to you guys. Like, you have a weird deployment. Or let's suppose it goes well in the job matching, but now your client, they call and say, hey, the guy you sent me has like very low productivity. What's going on here? So that's 3 months later, because there is a lag and you don't realize. So you just like deploy. Yeah. And then 3 months after, you realize like, wow, man, the AI was so bad in screening. So it was so good in screening people on the job, matching variables, but like so bad in screening top candidates, as in productivity. That's kind of too late, right? So this you can anticipate from the perspective of the candidate, and in terms of like fairness, in terms of ethics, in terms of whatever, which is like important for them. What if, as a firm, you deploy this AI, right? And everything seems to be great on terms of efficiency, right? Or like economics. So preaching is great, job matching is great, but you didn't realize that people actually hate the process, and they don't come back again next because they hate it. They don't want to talk to an AI. They feel discriminated by an AI. They don't trust it whatsoever. If you know that information as well, you know. Now, third case. Imagine if you had given the choice of to people not to be interviewed by an AI, you would have known that they actually always prefer a human. So if you force them to be in face of an AI, they kind of like, okay, I have to, I am a low wage income candidate. I have no other choice. I will go through it. But like, hey, if you were giving me the choice, I would say no. Well, that's extremely important to know, right? Because you don't want to impose anything on people. You want to make sure why they would be resistant for potentially legitimate and maybe less legitimate reasons, but you want to investigate that. And that is where you see this mindset of a behavioral experimental economics directly helps you, because directly here I lash out to you basically here the experimental design that we have here. So people arrive, they're randomly assigned to a human, an AI, or having the choice. And immediately for the CEO here, this changed his perspective on the technology, because now he's understanding how to explore and exploit it, basically. Explore as in taking a bit more time, and then exploit it as in scaling it to like a bunch of jobs or in a bunch of like market.
To get into artificial intelligence and its connection to creation, one form of creation we do is storytelling. And storytelling involves creativity and then critical thinking. How do you look at critical thinking, and can you show us a bit or tell us a bit about your research on that in relation to storytelling?
Yeah, so I did my PhD. So my PhD in philosophy that I did in parallel was on critical thinking and how to develop an operationalized framework for that. And I won't go into the detail here because I mean it goes into a lot of formality and formalism, etc. But there are many definitions of critical thinking from by psychologists, by philosophers, etc. And the one I look at was people being aware that the issue at hand is ambivalent. So if I tell you, are you pro against digital privacy? You know, there is no science behind the answer of this question that would give you a definite answer. And there are a lot of those issues in political arena. Some give you the false impression of having a truth because there is polarization in society. So some are like absolutely for something and some are absolutely against. But those supports are not science, so they still are, in some sense, normative claims that you believe you should be for A and you believe you should be for B. And when you face those type of issues here, either you become aware that despite being for child privacy, maybe you are man, you're like against it for legitimate reasons. Am I aware of those reasons? Am I aware that, yeah, I am for, but you know, I'm also aware I could be against if for some reason, basically. So that's the definition we are trying to capture in my agenda so far of critical thinking. So it's kind of some kind of a basic definition, but it's already hard to capture and identify. The philosophy PhD goes in more details on what to do in face of this when you face this type of issues. How can you formalize? How can you like represent a framework for making a decision when you become uncertain after? Because the next step is once you become aware that you have two argument for and against, you might become aware uncertain about which one to go with, right? And now you face this what we call moral uncertainty or normative uncertainty, and then you need you can use a lot of decision theory tools to formalize and represent, even if it's just an experiment, like just to help you clearing your mind on how to approach this question. That's what the PhD in philosophy did. The PhD in economics basically tried to just identify this claim, becoming aware that the issue at hand is ambivalent, has pro and cons, basically. Just identifying that. And this is where I thought about using the media environment, not only now as a source of information as it is traditionally considered, but as a source of storytelling. So as a source of proposing argument for and against, basically. And then when there is no science here, you need some kind of like force, or like some strength, or like some fuel, or like some motor, basically, to put people into like this awareness state of the mind. And if there is just like argument, maybe that's not enough as a strength, right? As a trigger. So the way we present the arguments becomes even more important in the case of when there is no truth or when there is no objective fact here. This is where storytelling kicks in, because now you can imagine the media environment not only as a way of proposing argument, but also as proposing argument in a certain package. So you can think about Twitter as being one of those environments, as representing one type of storytelling environment where, you know, you have like thread and the information is cut in different ways and you have people talking to each other. You can think about the more traditional media as another source of like storytelling. Now, people not having any debate on the New York Times, but they just browse articles in some way or another one, which is a report, an editorial, or whatever. And then you may have like Facebook, where you have this in between, where it's like this kind of vibe of long argument, but not too long. I mean, at least before Elon Musk took over Twitter, and now you have all these longs. That's basically the idea here, and how we can use that and conditional on being exposed to different type of storytelling environment. Are you more likely to become aware that the issue at hand is basically ambivalent? That's how we approach the problem. And for that particular question, it was so hard to identify. That's where having a lab in field experiment was very helpful for us, because you can control the environment, you can control your design, your experiment, and you could use here AI to generate all the storytelling environment, neural network and all other type of simulators, which are very easy to use because they didn't require any coding. Even in 2020, you could also use like GPT-3 types level to create writing style to different, because storytelling can be seen at least through 4 different type of dimension. The writing style, the way you talk, the way you write. It can be seen as the UX design. So like Twitter has its color, its format, like etc. Facebook has those other ones, etc. You have the source credibility. If like newspaper being maybe more accurate than in Twitter, because you may think it's facing more noise. So that's part of the storytelling. And the delivery of the information, or the delivery of the story. So if you're like on Twitter, you have a thread and you have to scroll over like a thread. If you're like on a newspaper website like New York Times, it's a long piece of article and that's it. So this might change, because maybe multiple people can share the same argument or different piece of the argument on Twitter, whereas in the newspaper website like New York Times, you have one guy writing one article, and that's it. Those are at least 4 dimensions. We don't know in my experiment here which one of those dimension has more power in pushing people into critical thinking, but at least we know that the environment matters, and does matter. So the point of this paper was just some kind of a proof of concept, like, does it matter or not? And it matters. That was what we wanted. And then we ask why it matters, basically. And it matters because of the different type of cognitive style that people have when they interact with the story, basically, or with the storytelling environment even. So some people have a high need of cognition, and most of the time, this high need of cognition has been interpreted in psychology as a higher need for more information. But here, it doesn't mean that, basically. It means that, like, at least counterintuitively, it doesn't mean that people are more reacting when they have a high need of cognition to the newspaper environment, but in our case, more likely to react to the Facebook environment. So it means like the high need of cognition population is more reacting to a rich enough or optimally rich enough environment, not only in terms of information, but in terms of all these 4 dimension potential. So high need of cognition is being more likely, basically, being in an environment that is going to give you all the tool, the material that you need to really engage in your cognition, in yourself, basically. So that's like the first throw. As I said, it's an MVP because it's not pre-registered study, and for me, it's super important. So the next step now is like to pre-register those type of findings we have and test them again on a larger sample size. I mean, it was large relatively to the standards we have in behavioral economics. So my sample was 700, more than 700 people, which is larger, but yet, standards of science also have changed. So, I mean, if I can do it, I should do it.
It's a big element there. When I go onto different platforms, I can have a pretty good sense. I can feel the default story. I like to look at the default of any platform because there's always subsections and each one has their own feel. But there is definitely a story in how you look at it, the general messaging style, how you like the UI, and there's a new one, Blue Sky, that it hit 20 million or something users a few days ago. It has a certain feel. Twitter has a certain feel, but Facebook has a certain feel. Each of those they point in a certain way and they make you think at a certain Snapchat might not cause, or it has a different level of thought that it evokes compared to Twitter text form. And I think it has a big impact because that's what you're taking away from it. And it's just a moment in time. Whenever you're using them, it seems like they are there forever and will be there forever. But actually, MySpace, moment in time, this one, moment in time, this one, moment in time. So what is that moment in time representing mainly? There's something to look at. And does that promote thought? It's like the creation versus consumption. Is it causing more inspiration to create or make, or is it causing more scroll, scroll, scroll kind of thing? That's another element. There's a lot of parts to it.
True. I mean, so that's why also like, so one limitation of this study that we did is like we did in a lab setting. So we removed a lot of behavior that you would see in a natural setting, like scrolling, for instance. In our case, there was no infinite scrolling. People were exposed to the same amount of time across the three treatments. So it was Twitter, Facebook, or newspaper, same amount of time in total. They were exposed to the same amount of character counts. And they were, for each tweet, they were exposed to a certain amount of time, such that, like it was automatically switching. So we had to fix a lot of variability that exists naturally to first understand, even like, that's why I'm saying it's a very simpler proof of concept here. I mean, it was very complicated, but it's still very simpler when you think about all the complexity that you mentioned here, because yeah, it's just showing that. So now the question is like, would that replicate? I mean, now there is Elon Musk, so it's a bit harder because it cut the access to the API for researcher, but like, so I cannot really do it in a real setting as well, but finding some kind of like real settings where we could try to launch that in real setting and see what is the traction of the storytelling element for critical thinking in the real setting is something that I mean, I would be super interested to do, because there is this misconception of social media exposure or media exposure in general. I mean, just like screen exposure. I mean, now it's becoming even more screen exposure, but like might just lead to like us becoming dumber. But maybe what I'm looking for is like this small, easy fix on, you just twist that and you see this way. Now it become like a propellant for critical thinking at no cost. That would be fantastic, right? I mean, for everyone, like even if you're like an influencer or whatever, or like even like if you're a firm, you might be incentivized to basically help people becoming critical thinking. So, and that's another where there is a win-win between firm, government, and citizens. Those are rare, but I mean, those are the one I look for, because I mean, that's like, if you find it, it's an easy fix for everyone at scale.
I like that. A little tweak can make a huge difference. I've seen that happen. There was one relationship person, he talked about it for people in relationships. A little tweak, it can happen in business where something, oh, this is completely the wrong direction. Little thing, oh, suddenly in the right direction.
Yeah.
And then I like that you pointed out difficulty, oh, complicated, but simple. It is easy from the outside to describe, oh, let's handle these 5 different details. Let's compare them and do research on that. But to actually look at something crisply, like your Twitter, Facebook, and newspaper, and keep things in line, is so complicated on the back end. And then on the front end, it would seem like, wait, why don't you add the other 19,000 variables? But
Yeah.
that's a funny thing. If
Yeah.
everything was so close to that kind of tone that shows up across a lot of discourse, then we would have everything handled and everything would have already been figured out. It's always an entertaining tone to me, and usually doesn't come from the individual doing the specificity, because then you would see, oh, wait a minute, this is not so light. This is not
Yeah.
so light.
I mean, this is also what happened when I talked to firms, right? They thought like AI was like a miracle, and then I start saying like, did you imagine all these potential cases? Do you have any ideas what would be the impact for you if you don't try to? I mean, it's not to scare them, right? It's just like to help them. And they're like, oh my God, I was just going to deploy AI and just have fun at scale on 100,000 people. I was like, okay. And now it's like, no, I won't. And I said, look, I'm not going to come and have the fix for the 90,000 problems that I ping and show you here, but let's start with a few and the most important one. And let's try to make that observation and your vision on those extremely clear and robust. Once you start having this counterintuitive approach to any deployment, basically, whether it's like your research or whatever that you just did here, and you start imagining all the problems, now you realize on, and the next step is like, okay, just let's focus on one or two, and how you really are going to be capable of like having real point estimate effect on those, like really measuring those. Now you realize that how many more back-end problems that, as you mentioned here, pops up. And now people start realizing how much they need working together, and just focusing on a few, basically. And but this changed completely the way of like because like the firm, they want to go as fast as they can, and I absolutely understand in a competitive world. But like sometimes when it really matters for a few points, it might be worth it even for your competitive survival rate a long term, to just also take a few seconds. I mean, maybe 6 months, or allocate a bit more resources in some way to help basically understanding what you're doing is going to work or not. And again, here there is no other way around also for them than using a scientific approach, like if they are very serious about impact. So having this built-in approach of experimentation, once it's done for this particular version of AI or whatever it is, it will change the way they conduct business in the long term. Like government, it's the same. I say business and firm, by the way, but like this applies to any organization. I mean, I'm talking about firm because those are the ones who have been the most ready so far in deploying a technology. So those are the ones the most exposed to technology at first. But this is true for everyone. So this economic approach is like a bit in, like, you want to know if your show is doing great or great in that metric, or whether the project is going to launch. Well, you have to test in some sense. I mean, you can ask people, they're going to report you stuff, but I'm not saying people are lying, but they will absolutely misreport, because this is a fact. We don't know what to tell you in a survey sometimes, most of the time.
I like to mention that example of what is used. There's one on this, these go out on YouTube, and one nice feature that has just recently rolled out that I've been making use of is that YouTube has a AI ask feature on the videos that get put out. So can basically, it has like a chat GPT for each episode, and then you can ask it to summarize on YouTube, or ask it a question for the guest or the host or anybody, and it does such a great job of interpreting. You could ask like, what did John think about this type of research, and then it'll pull up different sections
Wow.
and what they said very quickly. I've been posting lately elements with that. I think it's super cool. That's a use case. Are use cases going to keep popping up across all locations? What kinds of things can we look to in upcoming times as far as use cases of AI for the general person?
Oh, for the general person, you mean, or I see. So, I mean, if you look at the general person as the scientist, right? Like, let's say what AI can do for a scientist. So that's the paper with Gary Charnes and John Lees here, on where we're trying to now just imagine a bit. So here is like those methodology paper. So to me, when there is like a shock of technology, are really important for everyone. Because why I did that paper is like the reason, there is a technology arise basically, and if you're not really familiar with the technology itself, you're not going to engage with it at the beginning of the cycle. You're going to have to wait a few years. But that's bad for science in some sense, because now only people who are close to technology are going to use it in such a way, and they're going to basically influence the way that other people in the node or the network are going to use it basically. And it's a lock-in effect. Now you are living in the world of a few, where people have been saying that, well, you should use AI for that and not that. And everyone has been using then AI for this use case. And now after 5 years that you can also do, as a guy who was not that close to AI, let's say, But if you were willing to use AI 5 years ago for this other use case, you couldn't. So the point of this paper was to make sure we could democratize not the use of AI per se, but like at least the awareness. This is what AI can do, and that's actually the new. The title under which the paper is going out at Nature Human Behavior. So it's like how a LLM can help. Basically, it's like to make scientists, so general population, in particular scientists, aware on the many potential use cases. This is a guideline and methodology piece because we don't show with data, we don't test here whether this is working or not that great, but at least we are aware of the different ways it can help at the design phase of your experiment, as when you implement the experiment, and then when you do the data analysis. And there are many different types of tools. I won't mention the brand here. I try to minimize the mention of the brand also in the paper, but like there are many fantastic tools that exist already, and just being aware can change your life. Like give you an example. You were talking about like ideation and exploitation and expansion of the idea a bit earlier. Here, once you have few ideas in science, it's really important to quickly know whether the research question you came up with is new or not. And this requires a lot of literature review, which is normally, but I mean, normally reading a lot of papers entirely in details, whatever, or like having like different ways of reading papers, but readings, and then making up your mind. Well, here you can go faster because now you have an AI that can give you like an overview of like multiple type of papers in a given literature. So, you can directly a bit more faster quicker know if what you found is an interesting idea. Of course, you can use also AI to help you ideate in some way, but these are cases which are already way more ethically concerning, or at least cognitively important, that they should be investigated right through like an A/B test in my case. Like maybe people become cognitively dependent, maybe people came up all with the same ideas, we lose creativity. So this is already, you see, like you just switch a bit and it becomes a really important use case where I would like to do an experiment before leaving everyone using for that particular use case. For the first one, having like a summary of papers at scale, I don't see any big danger except loss of knowledge in some sense, which is very important, but this can be fixed because you can always come back after. Once you have a question and you have a way of asking question here, you kind of like stuck cognitively, you are like in a mental path, and it's hard to undo it and imagine the other ways, right? Whereas if you use AI for summary, if it's not enough, not good, you can kind of detect it based on expertise and go and check it. So you're kind of free and autonomous, and you don't lose your agency. So those are like one use case, and we have many more in the paper for scientists. Now for the non-scientist people, I guess like, well, this is all going through this type of Google Workspace, like I'm sure you got those type of invitation from Google to use Gemini at your Google Drive, and all this, mini version of AI on your laptop, or like this Apple Intelligence on your phone. So I think a lot of things are going to go unnoticed by the population. But I mean, one thing you should be aware is like, if you use Apple Intelligence, or if you use like any AI on your laptop, you give access to your data. So I mean, if they tell you no, I mean, it's really hard always to quite understand. So I mean, that's to take into account, I guess.
It's a good point to include because that's your material in there. I like your element that you just brought up there, the agency. When you have something you have made or done, and then you run AI on it, now that's the world for it. So the further you get into that world, if this wasn't very accurate or informative, then anything based on that, you're starting to get stuck in your own sand, if you will. And so it's worth always looking at the cleanliness of your data or what you're making or doing first before you apply things to it, because the AI can only run off of what the base is, and if the base is not sharp, then any questions it answers about that from that won't be as sharp. Anything it infers from that won't be as sharp. So that is the important part there.
Yeah, I mean, sharp, I think I mean, it's like not being aware that it's not sharp. I think it's like the key risk that we should be afraid of, right? So you think it was good enough. That's like the problem, potentially, to me. I mean, the most important one. Yeah.
One, I always like to throw this in as a closing question for this time. What is one thing you like to express through your research, or something you're looking to find through your research, or something you would want people to know about your research? Is there any
Oh,
broad descriptor or answer to that comes to mind?
um, I think that there are many ways of doing interdisciplinary work, and I hope I am one example that can be done differently, um, in the sense of keeping both separate, but still being, being influenced and nourishing each approach. I think it's cool, and I like it a lot. And yeah, I think like working with firms, working with government, working with like, working within a setting or within a context, that's something I think really important. And I'm very excited about all these partnerships because, um, yeah, I mean, they give like, you were talking about use cases, but when you have a new technology which is not deterministic like the AI, you don't really know that. That's why also the philosophical approach facing AI is kind of a limitation sometimes. I mean, I don't want to sound negative because I do love philosophy, but you don't know what you should look at until you know. And you know that until you have deployed the thing in the context. Like, who would have thought about, like, how can how could you imagine what would be the impact of AI conducting a job interview or a podcast interview with real humans? I'm not talking about this notebook LM, like on the human. Like if you don't know that it can actually do it accurately, like, but now with this firm, like this opens a lot of new problem in terms of like a new cases that I didn't think. So that's a new set of AI risk here. Maybe, like the way that we should design the AI in this particular context, such that there is no deception involved. How do we ensure that even when the AI says, I am an AI conducting an interview for this firm, I'm not taking a decision? If people truly cannot distinguish the voice between an AI and a human, they might not believe it's truly an AI because it's so good. So, you know, so even if when you try to help people, maybe what you're doing is not actually helping people. We talk about this label for knowing whether it's AI detected, AI generated or not. Well, it sounds a great idea, but like, does it work at scale? How do you know that people are truly believing the label itself not being AI generated? Or, like, these are cases where you cannot imagine as a philosopher, as whoever you want, until someone's bring them to you, right? Or like until you experience them firsthand or until you are exposed to them. And that's why I love working with those partners, because I can answer your question about what would be the future use case by working now and telling you, well, those guys shut down this use case of AI because it was so dangerous, or those guys maximize this use case because it was so beneficial for everyone. This one we're not so sure yet, so we need more testing. That's I love a lot, actually.
That's a good point right there. I like that concept of you don't know what exactly to look at. Yeah, you need to deploy the thing before you can see the full scope of what is happening.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
and
like,
you need like I mean, a human being, like, or like a researcher or like wherever you are, is not evolving only with one time frame as a plan, right? So I myself, I've always in the back end of my head as well, philosophical question and like long-term questions all the time, for sure. But the question is, you don't operate only on this long-term horizon. You operate on interaction between long-term, mid-term, short-term, like, and there is this interaction that give you, all right, I want to do that because that's this configuration I'm trying to maximize over time, right? So it's more about a combination of these different perspectives together and not in an antagonist way that we can truly like move. But like doing only philosophy of AI or only economics of AI, I believe it's kind of misleading to always have in mind the big picture.
It's true. I've talked with ethicists, and then if you only had ethics and no deployment, you would never even start the thing because there's these four concerns, and so we're not going to participate. And then if you only have the vision of what it will do, then you would go full throttle without any checking of what's going to happen. So
Yeah.
there's
And if the AI ethicists in the firm don't interact with the economists, then it's as if you had no ethicists in the house, right? Or whether engineers were not talking to economists or whatever, not talking to each other, because the, like organization of like the culture of organizations is extremely important on the success of an adoption of a technology as a society, basically. I mean, um, yeah, because engineers don't do A/B tests, and yet we need A/B tests. But people who do A/B tests, they need to know a bit which kind of AI version we're talking about and whether it's feasible, the request you have. And then the AI ATCs people, well, they tell us those ideals. They tell us also those like more accessible objective. Not all philosophers of ethics are like only looking at this long term. So they have also pragmatic mindset. But like, okay, how I'm create a scale for measuring this importance of like, are we losing a human agency with AI? Well, I mean, how do you measure that? It sounds sexy, very interesting, and very important. But like, how I measure that, how I provide data, how I develop an evidence-based policy. Let me think. If I can come up with something, does it match your theory? Does it match your definition? No, yes, like compromise and let's move. Technology is moving, eh? And I'm talking when technology is moving, so we need also to deploy and iterate.
it's very about. There's a lot of themes that come up that I think about as far as humanity, and then it connects to the application of this. So I like that there's a link there. Agency is a big one that I look at. Momentum, the compounding. There's a lot that goes on that if you don't take that into account, well, this is just a simple way. But if you take all these things into account, it's a whole different way to look at what we are doing. It's important. Perspective. And then without everybody's perspective, maybe it's missing some pieces.
Yeah.
Dr. Brian Jabarian, I would like to thank you for having been on this discussion of the show, a bit about economics, your research, wonderful material connected to AI, critical thinking, and more. Maybe to have you on in the future. Glad to have you on this time. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Very glad to. And we are